May I stand on the already established protocol? Today I'm seeing another side of presentation of papers, especially when you have like 4 or more people giving keynote addresses. You will now see that each person will be giving it from his or her own perspective. But somehow you find that there will be brilliant discussion at the end of the day. And we hope you'll be able to take something from each person's paper. Of course, from time immemorial, the farmer-herder conflict in Nigeria has been a many-sided crisis deeply rooted in historical, socio-economic, and environmental factors. The address aims to critically examine the origin, causes, and consequences of this long-standing conflict, with a particular focus on pathways to sustainable peace. In addressing the root causes of farmer-herder conflict through justice and inclusive dialogue. Fulani herders have a migratory pattern and socio-political history which are integral to understanding the tensions emerging from the legacy of Uthman Dan Fodio of the 19th century's Islamic revival and the subsequent establishment of the Sokoto Caliphate. The conflict is increased by ethno-religious dynamics that have positioned Nigeria's middle belt as a volatile fault line. The immediate catalyst for confrontation predominantly involve the destruction of crops by cattle, water contamination, and various forms of mutual harassment between farmers and herders. Yet, these proximate triggers are underpinned by deeper structural issues such as climate change, population growth, poverty, and ethnic identity politics. The human toll has been staggering, with tens of thousands of lives lost and mass displacements contributing to heightened insecurity and social fragmentation. Efforts to mitigate the conflicts have included government initiatives like grazing reserves in the form of Ruga, which eventually had to be suspended, the National Commission for Nomadic Education to enable nomads have a normal form of education, and military operations as well as international programs aimed at fostering peaceful coexistence. However, the effectiveness of these interventions remain limited, hindered by governance challenges, political resistance, and the complexity of the crisis. This keynote calls for pathways to sustainable peace in securing Nigeria's future, addressing the root causes of farmer-herder conflict through justice and inclusive dialogue. Nigeria as a nation is a highly diversified society. The diversity of Nigeria stems through religion, culture, language, historical origin, ethnicity, and economic practices, amongst several other lines of diversification. To this end, different cultural and ethnic groups are predominantly known for specified practices. For instance, the South people of the North are majorly known for fishery. because of the riverine nature of their area. The southwest is known for farming of tree crops like cocoa, rubber, kola nut, palm oil, etc. While the northern people, that is the Hausa Fulani in particular, are predominantly known for livestock farming, such as cattle, sheep, and goats. In view of the fact that the Fulanis are predominantly known as the traditional dealers in livestock, the conversation arising from livestock farming is not overemphasized. To this end, to trace the history of herders in Nigeria may tantamount to tracing the history of the Hausa Fulani in Nigeria, since keeping herds of animals are predominantly their occupation. It is submitted that the Fulani group's origin did not just start from Nigeria, because they are also found in Senegal, Ghana, and a host of other places. And indeed, they are also greatly predominant in Nigeria. The pastoral nature of their livestock farming sees them moving from one part of the country to the other in search of vegetation that can support the feeding of their livestock as the season changes. Because when the season changes within the north and they are no longer able to get grass, then of course they begin to migrate to places where their cattle can feed better. This can be regarded as their quest for livelihood and economic activity, not necessarily towards encroachment or destruction. However, those in the north, in the south, also have a duty to protect their own crops and their own vegetation, which they have taken time painstakingly to look after. They therefore will challenge any person, any herder, that chooses to bring their cattle within their domain to eat up whatever they have grown and have put in so much effort to preserve. It must be noted that for centuries, herders and farmers in Nigeria coexisted in a symbiotic relationship, in friendship. And I'm sure if you saw the logo, the picture that was there initially, you could see the friendly atmosphere between that herder and that farmer. That was the kind of relationship that herders and farmers had initially. However, we need to know where this pain, where this anger eventually started. Where did we get it wrong? Where did people begin to get bloody? Where did they begin to get arrogant? When did pain begin to arise in their minds? The peaceful coexistence began to unravel due to combination of environmental, socio-economic, and political factors that have transformed these disputes from mere disagreements to brutal, bloody confrontations. Now, climate change and desertification in the northern region have pushed herders and their cattle southwards in search of grazing land and water. The southward migration brings them into direct conflict with growing population of sedentary farmers, leading to clashes over increasingly scarce resources, because the pain of the economy naturally reaches everyone. It's no longer easy to allow people to eat. And then the wickedness of entering into a particular farm and eating the farm produce instead of grass, of course, is a sign that would breed anger in whoever the farmer is. Now, population growth and land security have also led to expansion of farmlands and settlements, encroaching on traditional grazing routes and reserves will naturally be encroaching on another person's fundamental rights. Now, proliferation of weapons. Now, Nigeria got to a stage where a lot of politicians chose to use political thugs. In trying to use those thugs, small arms and light weapons increasingly became the order of the day. And having trained people who are not well educated on how to use such arms, they decided to use it to their own advantage and sometimes to the pain of the people that they are getting in contact with. And of course, having such explosive items have caused Nigerians a lot of pains because they have not thought wisely about how to use it. They just feel, well, if you won't let me get on your farm, then of course, then you have to die. Sometimes they go into other unwholesome activities like raping women on farms and a lot of things. And I see that as utter wickedness. From the above, one can summarize that some of the key reasons for farmer-herder conflicts are, for example, land tenure insecurity. The two sides are fighting over who has ownership or access to the land in question. And then, of course, there is also the loss of grazing land because the desertification in some areas makes it imperative that perhaps their own area of jurisdiction will not have the requisite grass for the purpose of grazing their cattle. There is climate change, environmental degradation, and of course population pressure. The country is, with a country with over 200 and something million inhabitants, you can only imagine what population pressure will be doing in terms of agricultural intensification, because then the more the people, the more the need for agricultural intensification. Then, of course, there is weak institutional framework. We do not have the law particularly that would redirect the regulation concerning grazing. There are other countries where you don't see grass at all, and yet they have cattle, they have herd, and things are going on well. So perhaps we need to redirect our minds to those areas, and then we must reduce militarization of individuals, especially those that do not have the requisite license to deal with such items. And of course, migration spillovers have also caused situations, because while they are migrating, if they are stopped from one region, then of course they stay in the forest in another region and perhaps begin another colony in that place. And before you know it, it's another robust area for conflicts. So, of course, the consequences of this behavior has resulted in loss of lives, decline in agricultural output, rise in food prices, loss of rural livelihood, heightened communal trust, and social fragmentation. It has weakened governance. It has undermined investor confidence and rural development. Now, let's look at the ways towards sustainable peace. Since we're about to round up. Now, perhaps Nigeria should begin to work towards establishment of grazing reserves and ranches in different clusters where they know that herders will need grazing support. Of course, they don't have to roam around from one place to the other. They don't have to be nomads. They can properly establish grazing reserves. Nigeria can support those herders within those areas to establish these reserves so that their livestock will not suffer unduly. There can be livestock value chain development and support services so that those who are dealing in herds will also be well educated about how to bring up their cattle and herds without unduly interfering with the rights of another person. Then, of course, land use planning and zoning integration needs to be properly interrogated. People need to know the rules relating to land use so that you don't just dabble from one area to the other. You must know when your right to feed your cattle is beginning to infringe on another person's right to own land and infringe on the person's right to also have peaceful habitation of his property. Then, of course, judicial strengthening and accountability needs to be looked at, because when you take a herder farmer conflict to court and it's going to last 5 years, then you are losing more in terms of finance for bringing the case to court. So there must be some kind, maybe a court should be established to deal with such specific situations. Just like we have family courts, we have courts that deal with terrorism, we should also have a court that would deal with farmer herder situations so that it will be fast when they are dealing with such situations. Then, of course, transformation to commercial ranching, which I already discussed, should be interrogated. Regional interstate harmonization and cross-border frameworks between the states, they should be able to have some kind of discussion so that if they want to now begin to work together, if they now begin to collaborate, perhaps things will be better than using undue force. Then, of course, social cultural integration and narrative change should begin to work in our minds so that we don't begin to assume that you can do whatever you like within your domain without anyone being able to complain. We must have some kind of fairness and equity. If you destroy another person's property, there should be some kind of transition, some kind of compensation that would compel you to provide some kind of fair, dispensation for what you have done. And perhaps that way you will weigh the crops that you are spoiling and how much you are going to pay in compensation. Perhaps that would also be a way to checkmate people. And of course, that political will should be there by the lawmakers in particular, and our politicians. They should have that political will to be able to stop this farmer-herder conflict. And of course, most of these issues started when they used those people to carry out their own political thuggery. If at the end of the day you are unable to compensate them appropriately, then of course you have given them weapons which they are likely to use against not only masses, but perhaps if you are not careful, the gun can also be used against you. And I think with some of these tips, we should be able to have a way forward in looking at farmer-herder considerations. Thank you very much.